I've spent my entire life navigating the fog-choked waters of Gloucester Harbor. There's a history here, one that's as deep and dark as the ocean itself. The harbor's seen its share of blood and tears, from shipwrecks to lost souls claimed by the sea. But to me, it's home, a place where I've found peace amid the isolation. The sea is unpredictable, sure, but I've come to know its moods, its secrets. Or at least I thought I did. My name's Bobby, and I've been fishing these waters since I could hold a rod. The salt air, the creak of the boat beneath my feet, the rhythmic pull of the nets. It's all I've ever known. People say I'm as rugged as the old boats that line the docks. A man who's more at ease on the water than on land. Maybe they're right. Out here, it's just me and the sea, a bond that's as old as time. There are stories, of course. Every harbor has its share of ghost tales and superstitions. They say the waters hide things, dark things, but I've always laughed them off. Just tales to scare the new guys, or so I believed. It was supposed to be a quiet night, the kind I've had 1,000 times before. The sun dipped below the horizon, leaving a blanket of darkness over the harbor. The water was still, almost unnaturally so, and the only sounds were the distant cries of seabirds and the gentle lapping of waves against the hull. I should have felt at ease, but something wasn't right. There was a chill in the air that had nothing to do with the weather. A tension, like the sea was holding its breath. Then I heard it, a melody drifting across the water. At first, I thought it was the wind playing tricks on me, but as the sound grew clearer, I knew it was something else. The song was haunting, beautiful in a way that made my heart ache, like a forgotten memory. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere all at once, wrapping around me, tugging at something deep inside. Every instinct I had screamed to turn back, to get out of there, but I couldn't. My hands gripped the wheel tighter, yet my boat moved forward, drawn towards the source of that melody. I knew I should leave, but the pull was irresistible, like I was under a spell. The further I went, the more I felt that I wasn't in control anymore. The melody led me to a cove I'd never noticed before, tucked away from the main harbor. The water here was different, darker, almost black, with an eerie stillness that made my skin crawl. A faint, unnatural glow shimmered just beneath the surface, casting long, distorted shadows over the rocks. I should have turned back then, but the song was stronger here, pulling me in like a fish caught on a line. I couldn't stop myself. I didn't want to stop. As I drew closer, I saw her, sitting on the rocks, her silhouette sharp against the pale moonlight. She was beautiful, more than I could put into words, with long, flowing hair that seemed to move with the rhythm of her song. Her voice filled the night air, wrapping around me, making my heart pound in my chest. But something was wrong. Even in the dim light, I could see her eyes, too bright, glowing with an unnatural light. And her smile, it was too wide, too sharp, like a predator eyeing its prey. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to turn back, but I was too far gone. I reached out to her, my hand trembling, but as I did, the illusion shattered. Her skin rippled, scales glistening in the moonlight as her form twisted and contorted. What had been a beautiful woman was now something else entirely. A creature of the deep, with sharp teeth glinting in the dark. Her once melodic voice now a twisted, mocking echo of the song that had lured me in. The smile that had once seemed inviting now dripped with malice, her eyes glowing with hunger. Fear surged through me, but it was too late. The siren had revealed her true form, and I was trapped, ensnared by the very thing that had drawn me to her. The harbor, once familiar and safe, had become a nightmare, and I was right at the center of it. Panic seized me as the siren's true form loomed before me. I tore my gaze away, stumbling back towards my boat, my heart pounding in my chest. I fumbled with the engine, my hands shaking so badly I could barely grip the controls. The boat sputtered to life, but the siren's song had changed. No longer beautiful, it was now filled with malice, each note digging into my mind like claws. I pushed the throttle forward, desperate to escape the cove, but the boat moved sluggishly, as if something was holding it back. The song grew louder, wrapping around me, pulling me back towards the shore. I tried to resist, but my limbs felt heavy, my movements sluggish and uncoordinated. It was as if the very air was thick with the siren's power, dragging me back to her. No matter how hard I tried, I couldn't break free. The boat's engine sputtered and died, leaving me adrift in the dark water. The last thing I heard before I was pulled under was her lullaby, twisted and mocking, echoing in my mind as the cold water closed over my head. The next morning, my boat was found drifting aimlessly in the harbor. The water was eerily calm, the fog hanging low over the surface. There was no sign of me, only the faint, lingering echoes of a song carried on the breeze. The locals whispered of curses and sea monsters, their fear of the harbor growing with each retelling. Gloucester Harbor had claimed another soul, and the siren's lullaby would haunt its waters forever. Epicuan was once a thriving resort town, a jewel on the shores of Lake Epicuan. But that was before the flood. Decades ago, the lake rose without warning, swallowing the town whole, taking lives and leaving behind nothing but ruins beneath the water. Now, the harbor near what's left of Epicuan is a place of eerie silence, where the echoes of the past seem to linger in the air. The stillness is unsettling, like the calm before a storm, and the locals avoid it, whispering of spirits that haunt the waters at night. I'm Noah, a journalist with a taste for the unusual. Ghost stories, urban legends, anything that blurs the line between fact and fiction. That's where I thrive. I've been to places most people wouldn't dare set foot in, all in search of the truth behind the stories. The legends of Epicuan caught my attention, especially the tales of those who drowned in the flood, their spirits said to wander the shore. The locals warned me about the harbor, about the things that come out when the sun goes down. But I've heard it all before, and it's never stopped me. Ghosts? Just stories. I'm here to find out what really lies beneath the surface. The harbor was more desolate than I imagined. As I pulled up, the silence was deafening. No birds, no wind, just an oppressive stillness that settled over everything. The water was dark, reflecting the overcast sky like a mirror, and in the distance, I could see the remnants of Epicuan. Broken structures jutted out of the water, twisted and worn by time, like skeletal fingers reaching towards the sky. It was hard to believe this place had once been full of life. Now it was nothing more than a graveyard. I geared up, my wetsuit clinging to my skin as I checked my equipment. The stories were just that, stories. I was here to find the truth, to capture what was left of Epicuan beneath the surface. But as I slipped into the water, a chill ran through me that had nothing to do with the temperature. The water was murky, visibility low, but I could just make out the outlines of buildings below. Silent, ghostly reminders of what had been. As I descended, the unease grew. The water felt colder than it should have, and more than once, I thought I heard whispers, faint and distant, carried by the currents. Twice, I felt something brush against my skin. Just the water, I told myself, but the dread was building. The deeper I went, the more I felt it. This wasn't just a sunken town. There was something here, something that didn't want to be disturbed. My skepticism started to waver, replaced by a gnawing fear that I was no longer alone. Breaking the surface, I gasped for air, relieved to be out of the suffocating depths. But something was wrong, terribly wrong. The harbor, once clear and open, was now swallowed by a thick, unnatural mist that clung to the water like a living thing. The familiar landmarks were gone, obscured by the fog that seemed to pulse with a life of its own. My boat, which should have been a short swim away, was nowhere in sight. I wasn't alone. As I turned, I saw them. Figures moving along the shore, their forms barely visible through the haze. At first, I thought they were people, locals maybe, come to check on me. But as they drew closer, my relief turned to cold terror. They weren't people. Their eyes were empty, hollow sockets that stared without seeing, and their skin was pale, almost translucent, like they had been underwater for far too long. They moved silently, their feet not quite touching the ground, gliding over the surface in a way that made my blood run cold. Panic clawed at me as the truth settled in. This wasn't the world I knew. I was in their world now, the world of the drowned. I tried to tell myself it was just the fog, just a trick of the light, but deep down I knew. The legends were real, and I had crossed into a place where the dead walked among the living. My rational mind struggled to make sense of it, but the fear was too overwhelming, too real. They were moving towards me now, their empty eyes locked on mine, their movements slow but deliberate. I felt the weight of their presence pressing in, a cold dread that seeped into my bones. There was no escaping them, no waking up from this nightmare. I had trespassed into their domain, and they were coming to claim what was theirs. Panic surged through me as the ghostly figures closed in, their empty eyes fixed on mine. I thrashed in the water, desperate to reach my boat, but the mist had thickened, and I couldn't see where I was going. The water felt heavier now, like it was pulling me down with every stroke. My breath came in ragged gasps, fear driving me faster, but it wasn't enough. I felt them, their icy hands brushing against my legs, cold as death, dragging me back toward the shore. I kicked harder, trying to break free, but they were too strong. The water swirled around me, dark and unforgiving, as more hands joined in, pulling me down into the depths. My heart pounded in my chest, a wild, desperate beat, but my limbs were growing numb, my strength fading. I screamed, but the sound was swallowed by the mist, drowned out by the cold embrace of the water. They were relentless, their grip unyielding as they dragged me beneath the surface. Their empty eyes the last thing I saw before darkness consumed me. Later, my camera washed ashore, its light still blinking. The locals found it, and when they played the footage, their worst fears were confirmed. The screen flickered with images of the drowned town, ghostly figures moving through the mist, their hollow eyes staring out at the world of the living. And then, in the final moments, they saw me. My desperate struggle, the terror in my eyes as I was pulled under. The last frame lingered on the water, now still and silent, as if nothing had happened. But the town knew the truth. Epicuan had claimed another soul, and the legend of the drowned town would only grow stronger.
The port of Charleston is steeped in history, its waters once bustling with trade and sailors from distant lands. But beneath its surface lies a darker legacy, one of vanished ships and ghostly whispers carried on the wind. On foggy nights, the harbor transforms, the thick mist rolling in like a shroud, wrapping the old docks in an eerie silence. It's on nights like these that the locals speak in hushed tones of the ghost ship, a spectral vessel that appears out of nowhere, only to vanish without a trace, leaving behind nothing but fear and unanswered questions. I'm Emily, a marine researcher with a passion for separating fact from fiction. Ghost stories, legends of cursed ships. I've heard them all, and they've never shaken me. To me, they're just stories, rooted in the unknown but easily explained by science. But when reports started surfacing about strange lights and sightings near Charleston, I couldn't resist the pull. My curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to investigate the truth behind the tales. The locals warned me, told me to stay away, that the ship's cursed crew would claim any soul who dared approach. But I'm not one to be scared off by superstition. Ghosts aren't real, or so I thought. The fog rolled in thick as I navigated my boat out into the harbor, the pale glow of the lighthouse quickly swallowed by the mist. Visibility was nearly non-existent, with the world around me reduced to shades of gray. The water was eerily calm, the usual sounds of the port, gulls, waves, distant horns, muted as if the fog itself was holding its breath. Every sound I made seemed to echo in the stillness, the tension building with each passing minute. And then I saw it, emerging from the fog like a specter from another time. A massive sailing ship, its sails torn and tattered, the wood of its hull dark and weathered by centuries at sea. I froze, my breath catching in my throat as I stared at the vessel. This wasn't possible. Ships like this hadn't sailed these waters in centuries. But there it was, looming out of the mist, ghostly and silent. Driven by a mix of fear and unrelenting curiosity, I guided my boat closer, until I was nearly alongside the ancient ship. My heart pounded as I tied off and climbed aboard, the wood creaking ominously under my weight. The air was thick with an unnatural chill, each breath hanging in the air like smoke. The deck was empty, silent, as though time itself had forgotten this place. Steeling myself, I began to explore, determined to uncover the secrets that this ghostly vessel held. As I ventured deeper into the ship, the eerie silence was broken by soft, almost imperceptible sounds, the faint creak of wood, the gentle rustle of sails that shouldn't be moving in the still air. I tried to ignore it, convincing myself it was just the ship settling after years of neglect. But then I heard it, a whisper faint and unintelligible, carried on the cold air. I froze, my heart pounding as I scanned the empty deck, but there was no one there, just shadows and fog. Then I saw it. Out of the corner of my eye, a figure moved, a fleeting shadow, barely visible through the mist. I turned quickly, but it was gone. My breath came in short, panicked bursts as I backed away, but the feeling of being watched only grew stronger. The whispers grew louder, overlapping, coming from all directions, filling my ears with a chorus of ghostly voices. Suddenly they were there. Ghostly figures began to materialize around me, their forms translucent and glowing faintly in the dim light. They wore the uniforms of sailors from another era, their faces gaunt and hollow-eyed, as if drained of life. My blood ran cold as I realized these were the spirits of the crew. Men long dead, their souls trapped on this cursed vessel. One of them stepped forward, his eyes meeting mine with a look of despair. His voice, when it came, was a hollow echo, filled with centuries of sorrow. He spoke of a storm, one that had come upon them without warning, fierce and unrelenting. They had been betrayed by their captain, who, in a desperate bid to save his ship, had made a dark pact, a deal that condemned the crew to an eternity of wandering the seas, never to find rest. As they spoke, the reality of my situation hit me like a wave. This ship wasn't just a relic. It was a prison, and I had walked right into it. The crew had been bound here for centuries, their souls unable to move on, and now, somehow, I was part of this story. The whispers around me grew louder, more insistent, and the ghostly figures closed in, their hollow eyes pleading, as if begging me to understand the horror of their fate. But as I listened, one thing became terrifyingly clear. I was no longer just an observer. I was trapped, and the ship was not going to let me leave. Panic surged through me as the reality of my situation set in. I turned, bolting back toward the side of the ship where my boat was tied. But just as I reached the edge, a figure emerged from the fog, a tall, imposing man dressed in a captain's uniform, his eyes hollow and lifeless. He blocked my path, his presence overwhelming, the air around him heavy with centuries of despair. "You've disturbed our rest," he said, his voice like a death knell, echoing through the stillness. "Now you must choose. Join my crew, or suffer the same fate as those who have come before you." Terror gripped me, but I refused to accept his offer. I pushed past him, trying desperately to reach my boat, but the captain didn't move. Instead, the ghostly crew materialized around me, their cold skeletal hands reaching out, grabbing hold of my arms, my legs, pulling me back onto the ship. I fought against them, but their grip was unyielding, their strength far beyond anything I could resist. The mist thickened, swallowing the ship and everything around it. I screamed, but the sound was lost in the fog as the ship began to vanish, taking me with it. My last thoughts were of the life I was leaving behind, now lost to the cursed vessel that had claimed my soul. The next morning, the harbor was quiet. My boat was found drifting, empty, with my equipment scattered across the deck. There was no sign of me, and the ghost ship was gone, leaving only a whisper of its presence in the mist. The locals whispered of another soul claimed by the cursed vessel, another name added to the legend of the ghost ship, never to be seen again.